14. Hey, Alex, come on in.
How you doing?
What? It's already gone. So we are in a dark place. Mark chapter 14 and 15 are the final hours of Jesus' life, or so it would seem. And we're going to finish chapter 14 this evening. We're going to pick it up in verse 43, which is actually on page 1566 in here. So if you've been with us, you know in the story that Jesus has gone up to Jerusalem. He's told his disciples what he's doing there, why he's going. He has predicted his own death. He's also predicted his resurrection, but nobody seems to have remembered that part or even have believed that part. If you remember, just a few days before this, Jesus was with his friends in Bethany, and a woman anointed his feet with some very costly perfume, and the disciples reprimanded her for wasting the money that could have been made by selling this and giving the money to the poor. And Jesus tells them, no, this is appropriate, this is what should be done. And it was at that point that, if you remember the story, it was at that point that Judas betrays Christ, makes up his mind to sell him out. And other gospels tell us that Judas was the one who looked after the money, and he would skim off the top. And so giving money to the poor was his way of profiting off of this thing that they were doing, and this mission that Jesus was on. Judas ends up betraying Jesus for just a few pieces of silver. Later, as they went on from there, they celebrated the last Passover together, the Last Supper together, and everybody's kind of beating their chests and saying, "Oh, we're not going to betray Christ. We're going to stay loyal." Peter, in particular, insists that he would never betray Jesus, but Jesus predicts that he will. And so, as we move even further now into the dark, Jesus ends up on the Mount of Olives at Gethsemane, and last week we talked about this prayer that Jesus prays, "Father, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me." And if you were with us last week, you remember it's a disturbing thought that that in that moment of greatest temptation, of greatest anguish, we could say, Jesus is literally asking God the Father to get him out of this situation he's in. He doesn't want to die for the sins of the world. And it definitely is, I think, humbling for us. There's a whole, we talked last week about this, but there's this sort of whole genre of Christian music and literature that kind of points us in the opposite direction. That Jesus loved you so much. Jesus loved Raymond so much that he was willing to go through all of this pain and torture and hardship. And there's worship songs that sort of make us think that, the one thing that Jesus was thinking about above all else on the cross was me and you, and that's how precious we are to God. But the reality of the gospel story is that when Jesus is in that moment, his prayer is the opposite. If there's any other possible way for us to do this, God, I don't want to do it, but I do want to do what?
Your will.
Your will. And I don't know if I mentioned this last week, so I wanted to come back to it, that often, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but often if you were to ask someone the question, what is the golden rule? A common answer would be, love your neighbor as yourself, or do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or don't do to other people things that you wouldn't want them to do, or some variation of that. And I don't know how that kind of got into our culture or into our imagination that is the golden rule, but it's actually not, biblically speaking, the first and foremost commandment. What is the most important commandment, according to Jesus?
To love God.
To love God.
Love your God.
To love God.
All your heart, mind,
So,
Strength. Yes. What is the greatest commandment? Jesus was asked. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your soul.
Love your neighbor.
And
as
then
yourself.
love your neighbor as yourself. And so we could say, well, it's the silver rule. The silver rule to do as you want done by, to love your neighbor as yourself. But the golden rule in our minds should be what Jesus put first and foremost. What is your will, God? I want to do your will. Because, and we talked about this last week, and I know it's a review, we are going to hit these moments, many, many moments. I know for a fact that I've hit this moment many, many times when God is telling me to love somebody, and I desperately do not want to.
Yeah.
And the only reason I can fulfill that second command is because I'm devoted to the first command. God says I must do this, so I will do it. Not because they deserve it, not because they're worth it, not because they've done anything, not because they're lovely, not because there's nothing, I can't find any reason to do this other than God commands me to do it. And that's that bedrock that Jesus finds in the garden. The bedrock of his faithfulness is to do the Father's will. Because one disciple has already betrayed him. His best friend is about to. And the disciples that he asked to watch and pray with him have fallen asleep. And so the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is sin. Jesus knows that. He knows that if he is going to love God with everything that he has, he is going to have to do his will. He is going to have to remain obedient. Right? And what we see in the disciples' lives is that they have other loyalties. They have other things going on. And so even though they can say they love Jesus, and even though they say they love God, when it really comes down to it, they do fall into sin. Because they're tired, they're greedy, they're grumpy, they're bored, whatever, right? You can come up with all sorts of reasons why betraying Jesus, maybe it wasn't easy to betray him, but it was what ended up happening. So let's read together Mark chapter 14, verses 43 to 52. Could someone read that out loud, nice and loud for us?
And immediately, even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. He had been sent by the leading priests and the teachers of religious law and the elders. How far did we go?
To 52.
Okay. The traitor Judas had given them a prearranged signal. You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss. Then you can take him away under guard. As soon as they arrived, Judas walked up to Jesus. Rabbi, he exclaimed, and gave him the kiss. Then the other guards grabbed Jesus and arrested him. But one of the men of Jesus pulled out a sword and struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his ear. Jesus asked them, "Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there among you teaching every day, but these things are happening to fulfill what Scripture says about me." Then all the disciples deserted him and ran away. One of the young men following behind was clothed only in a long linen shirt. When the mob tried to grab him, he slipped out of the shirt and ran away naked.
Okay. So Jesus has been praying. He's been asking his disciples to stay up with him, to watch and pray. But in the midst of this, we read last week, Jesus says, "My betrayer is here." Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrives with the crowd. The crowd of men armed with swords and clubs, which indicates that some of these were probably what we would say were regular soldiers. Only people with permission from the Roman government could carry a sword at all. And so that would either be temple soldiers who would have been working for the Jewish leadership, or Roman soldiers. It doesn't say. But then there's also guys with clubs, deputized maybe to come along and take care of this. Sometimes people wonder why was it necessary to have Judas? Why couldn't they just go find Jesus and arrest him? But we have to remember, this is long before photography or IDs or anything like that. And so if you're going to go make a night arrest of somebody, you got to make sure you're going to get the right guy, and the best way to do that is to have someone who's going to go along with you and positively identify him, right? And so that's what Judas does. The prearranged signal is he's going to kiss him, which would have been, I mean, in most Mediterranean cultures, actually most cultures around the world today, it's not uncommon to greet with a kiss, but it is definitely a very personal way to greet somebody. In our culture, we might say, I'll greet him with a hug. California, I don't know, you guys ever gone anywhere outside of California? California's, we are huggers. Anywhere else in the country, probably anywhere else in the world, you don't hug anywhere near as much as Californians do, even strangers. It's like, oh, nice to meet you, hug. But it means something, right? That Judas, the traitor, greets him with a kiss. Verse 46, the others grab Jesus and they arrest him. But one of the men with Jesus pulled out a sword and struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his ear. Other gospels tell us that this is Peter. So Peter is the one who's been thumping his chest. I'm not going to betray you. I'm going to be with you to the end. Jesus has already predicted that he will. And Peter doesn't stay up. He doesn't watch and pray. But now in this moment of crisis, Peter steps up. Peter steps in with a sword. What else are you supposed to do when your Lord, your master, is being arrested? He strikes off the high priest's slave. He strikes off his ear. And Jesus then turns and he asks them. Who's the them?
That's the disciples.
The disciples. So you can almost imagine Jesus turning to these disciples, one of them at least has already drawn a sword. Am I some dangerous revolutionary? Literally, am I some violent upstart? Are we starting an armed rebellion here? Is that the plan? And you know from Mark's gospel, right? Is that the plan? To fight? Does Peter know this? Yes. Peter knows that this is the plan. And even though he knows that, he still is the first guy to pull out a sword and say, I'm ready to go to war. I'm ready to prove that I'm not going to betray Jesus. But if you think about it, even in that act of slashing off this guy's ear, has Peter already begun to betray Jesus?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. He's still trying to do things his way. You remember, you go back a few chapters in Mark, when Jesus tells Peter, we are going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to be crucified. And what did Peter tell him?
No.
No, you're not. Let me tell you what the Messiah should be doing. Let me tell you, Jesus, what I signed up for. Get behind me, Satan, is what Jesus had to say to Peter. And even now, in the moment of crisis, Peter is still doesn't get it. Am I some violent revolutionary? Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? You can imagine Jesus turning from his disciples to this mob. Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there among you teaching every day. And verse 50 might be there's going to be a series of just horribly tragic verses in this chapter. Someone read verse 50 again for us.
Then all his disciples deserted him and ran away. One young man followed behind, was clothed only in a long linen shirt. When the mob tried to grab him, he slipped out of his shirt and ran away naked.
Ooh.
All his disciples,
The original street.
all of them deserted him and ran away. And verses 51 and 52, it's almost as if Mark has added this detail to tell us just how desperate were these guys to get away from Jesus. How desperate was this disciple to betray and run?
So scary.
Very to lose his clothes.
So scared, he was willing to run away naked.
Yeah, to lose his clothes.
Terrified. You could say, well, I'd betray somebody, but I'd want to do it quietly. I wouldn't want them to find out about it. I certainly wouldn't run down Redlands Boulevard with no clothes on to try to get away from them. Right? Willing enough to betray Jesus, to be humiliated, to be literally naked, running away in the middle of the night. And so Mark is letting us know, like, this is how desperate these disciples were to get away from this guy that they had they had claimed they would have done anything for. Earlier, we saw that Judas was willing to betray Jesus when he stopped running his program. He stopped being able to make a profit off of Jesus. We could say, why did Judas betray Jesus? Well, we could run all sorts of things through our head. What was his motivation? The way that the story goes, he was finally motivated to betray Jesus when he realized Jesus is not going to make me any more money. And the high priest will. So he changes his allegiance. What we see in this episode, though, is why did these disciples betray Jesus?
Fear. Fear of dying.
I don't know. I don't know if you're afraid of dying if you're pulling a sword out in front of a whole mob and taking a shot at somebody's face. You're not afraid. What's changed?
Well, Jesus has allowed himself to be captured.
Jesus has surrendered.
Yeah.
Imagine if you signed up to be a violent revolutionary and your leader, your fearless leader, at the moment of crisis turns to you and says, like, we're not violent revolutionaries. Imagine if you signed up to go to war and then you get to the front lines and you're ready to pull the trigger and the general says, what are you guys doing? We're not soldiers. Right? Like, all of your expectations are just like being shattered. Judas signed up to follow Jesus because he could make money, and he realizes, I can't make any money, so he betrays him. Peter signed up to follow Jesus because he wanted to be a violent revolutionary. And then Jesus turns to him and he says, what are you doing? We're not violent revolutionaries. Right? And I think this is kind of the point I'm driving at here, is that if we sign up to follow Jesus because we think he's going to do something for us that he tells us very clearly, I won't do. When you finally get it through your head that Jesus isn't going to do what you want him to, we might end up doing exactly what every disciple in this story does. So we've got to think about it. Like, what do you think Jesus is, like, what did you sign up for? Is I think what Mark is putting in front of us. Like, if you signed up to follow Jesus because you thought Jesus was going to give you stuff, money, peace, security, a violent death, fighting the bad guys, a better country. I mean, we could make a huge list of reasons why people follow Jesus, right? My life back. If I follow Jesus, then maybe I can take a stab at another marriage. If I follow Jesus, then maybe I can not die of cancer. If I follow Jesus, then maybe, right? You fill in all those. You say, what if that's not what Jesus promised? Like, what if what Jesus promised is something completely different than our program? And what if you come face to face with Jesus and he says to you, what are you doing, Raymond? I didn't promise you all of this. We're actually going in a different direction. That's the crisis point, right? That's the temptation point. Because you either say, okay, my dream was maybe it was a good dream. Maybe there's nothing wrong with it. I gotta let that dream die, and I'm gonna go where Jesus tells me to go. And if we're not ready to do that, if I'm not ready to do that, then in the dark night, when the crisis hits, I'm gonna bail. Let's keep reading. Verses 53 to 65. It's a longer section, so maybe we'll do take a verse or two each if you want to read out loud, and we'll read through this whole section, 53 to 65. I'll start us. They took Jesus to the high priest's home, where the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers of religious law had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and went right into the high priest's courtyard. There he sat with the guards, warming himself by the fire.
Inside, the leading priests and the entire high council were trying to find evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death, but they couldn't find any. Many false witnesses spoke against him, but they contradicted each other. Finally, some men stood up and gave the false testimony.
We heard him say, I will destroy the temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another and made without human hands. But even then they didn't get their story straight.
Then the high priest stood up before the others and asked Jesus, well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself? But Jesus was silent and made no reply. Then the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?
Jesus said, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand, and coming on the clouds of heaven.
Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his horror and said, why do we need other witnesses? You have all heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict? Guilty, they all cried. He deserves to die. Then some of them began to spit at him, and they blindfolded him and beat him with their fists. Prophesy to us, they jeered, and the guards slapped him as they took him away.
Meanwhile. So we'll pick it up in a second, Zabon. Let's hit pause there for a second. So they arrest him, they lead him away. Where is Peter?
Peter's sitting by the fire.
He's hiding
Yeah.
out and watching.
So this is the way good stories work, right? Peter is still following Jesus, in a sense. But is he following Jesus? Where is he?
He's by the fire, keep him warm.
He's hiding.
With who?
Other people.
Guard.
With the guards. So he's following him, but he's not following. He's with him, but he's not with him. Peter didn't get arrested. Why not?
He's hung back.
I mean, you could fill in all kinds of blanks here, but it's like, if Peter was the one who cut off the priest's ear, and if Peter has followed the mob back to the high priest's house, but when he gets there, he has a seat by the fire. You guys ever sat around a fire with a group of guys? It's not just something you sort of casually sort of drift up and, right? There's something about this that's fellowship, association, right? I don't know if he knew these guys or what, but it's like he's gone from being with Jesus as his disciple, struggling to stay awake to pray, to being with the guards who arrested Jesus, warming himself by a fire. This is the way good storytellers tell us something catastrophic is happening. Something terrible is happening to Peter. But while Peter is there with the guards, with the men who arrested Jesus, warming himself by their fire, Jesus is being questioned by the leading priests, by the high council. These false accusations are being made that Jesus claimed that he was going to destroy the temple. He didn't claim that he was going to destroy the temple. He claimed that the temple would be destroyed. But they can't get their story straight, so they're bringing these charges. Are you the Messiah? Finally, they ask him. Are you the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus answers in this powerful way in verse 62, I am. Ego eimi in Greek.
Isn't that the same as when Moses went to God and asked him,
It
who shall I
is.
say sent me? I
That's
am.
right. It's a different language. It's Hebrew in the Old Testament. But when that verse was translated into Greek, it is these words, ego eimi, I am. It's the name of God. And then he quotes from Daniel chapter 7, which we went over it's been a couple of months now, but if you have questions about that, we could go back into it. But in Daniel chapter 7, there's this famous prophecy that one like the Son of Man would triumph over all of the beasts of the world and would be enthroned with God in the heavens, with the Ancient of Days. And so what Jesus he's claiming here is not just that he's the Messiah, not just that he's the Son of the Blessed One, but that he is the Son of Man figure from Daniel chapter 7. And if you go back and you read that prophecy, and for the sake of time we won't tonight, but if you have questions about it, it's very famous in that it says that the Ancient One, the Ancient of Days, sets up his throne, and one like a Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven into the presence of the Ancient of Days and is given an everlasting kingdom. And that passage is often misinterpreted to be talking about the second coming of Christ. Jesus coming on the clouds of heaven is some like a rapture passage or a second coming passage. But if you read Daniel 7 very carefully, the Son of Man doesn't go back from heaven to earth. The Son of Man goes into the heavens to be enthroned. And so what Jesus is telling the high priest here is not someday, way off in the future, I'm going to come back at this thing called the second coming or the rapture or something like that. What he's telling them is that you personally, you high priests, you high council, you people standing in judgment of me, you are going to see me enthroned where only God deserves to be enthroned. Which is quite a thing to say to people who have the power of life and death over you. Does the high priest understand what Jesus is claiming? Absolutely. Verse 63. He tears his robes. He's horrified. We don't need any more witnesses. He's just said it with his own mouth. Guilty, they all cried. He deserves to die. They begin to spit on him. They begin to beat him. They slap him as they take him away. Let's continue reading, pick it up in verse 66.
Meanwhile, Peter was in the courtyard below. One of the 7 guards who worked for the high priest came by and noticed Peter warming himself by the fire. She looked at him closely and said, "You are one of those with Jesus of Nazareth."
But Peter denied it. I don't know who you're talking about. He said he went out of the unclean way, then the rooster crowed. When the servant girl saw him standing there, she began telling the others, "The man is definitely one of them." But Peter denied it again.
A little later, some of the other bystanders confronted Peter and said, You must be one of them because you are a Galilean. Peter swore, "A curse on me if I'm lying. I don't know this man you're talking about." And immediately the rooster crowed the second time.
Suddenly, Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny 3 times that you even know me. And he broke down and wept.
So we come back to Peter. He's still in the courtyard below. And you can kind of, I don't know how we imagine Peter, but the way the Gospels describe him, he's a tough, right? He's a bit of a thug. He's a fisherman. He speaks his mind. And he's the one, as we said, who kind of thumps his chest and calls his shot. This is what I'm going to do. I'm never going to deny Jesus. I'm going to stick with him to the end. If we assume, and I think we can because of what the other Gospels say, that when that Peter is the one who draws a sword when the mob shows up. Soldiers and men with clubs. And he's out in front with a sword drawn. He's ready to go. He's ready to go. He's ready to start the revolution. And if Jesus won't swing the first, swing the first blow, he's willing to do it. And so you have this picture, right, of a man who is, in a sense, courageous. I mean, it would take some courage to stand up to Jesus and tell him he's wrong. Right? I mean, imagine that. Jesus says, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and die. And it would take some swagger to stand up to your Lord, your master, this rabbi who's claiming to be God. I don't know. I've never met I actually have met a few people that claim to be God, but they're a little bit crazy. But imagine, if you really believed that someone was God, would you stand up to them and tell them they were wrong? I mean, he's got some stones on this guy, right? That's the kind of man that Peter is. But now, he's been robbed of this identity. The violent revolution that he thought he was going to be a part of is over. He's sitting around a fire with the guards, and a servant girl challenges him. I mean, when Peter was anticipating what he was going to have to do for Jesus, maybe it had never occurred to him that the hardest thing he was going to have to stand up to was a little girl calling him out in front of a bunch of people. Say, man, you stood up to an armed mob, swords and clubs, and now you can't stand up to a little girl asking, hey, you're a Christian, right? But that's what's happening here. 3 times. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. And the rooster crowed. Peter denied it again. And the 3rd time, you must be one of them because you're a Galilean. Peter swore. He cursed himself. He cursed himself. Was how strongly he wanted to not be associated with any of this. And it just makes me think, right, that we I don't know if it's foolish or not, but I think a lot of times it's easy for us to say, I would die for Jesus. I would die for Jesus. Maybe everybody in the room would raise their hand and say, I would die for Jesus. But then it's a lot harder when you go back through and you think about your day, or you think about your week, or you think about the last month, or maybe you think about your life and you think, man, maybe I betrayed Jesus in like 1,000 ways or 10,000 ways that had nothing to do with dying for him, but had everything to do with much smaller things, much easier things, right? Much the things that should have come a lot quicker. You say, I would go and have my head cut off for Jesus, but I won't give up this sin, or I won't stand up for him at my job, or I won't give him 5 minutes of prayer at the beginning and the end of the day, whatever it might be, right? And the point of this is not to, I don't want to layer it on too thick because it's already a pretty heavy passage. But I think the reason why Mark put this here is so that we could ask that really hard question. Right? Like, what am I willing to stand up to for the sake of Christ? Like, what am I really going to fight for? I personally, I've known a lot of men over the course of my life that have seemed like they would be very willing to, go to war for Jesus, but are completely unwilling to stay out of the bed of some skirt for Jesus.
No.
And it's like, come on, guys. I don't know what the female equivalent is. I'll let you guys talk about that amongst yourselves. But it's the minor things that get us, I think. And the reason why I think it's so important that we focus on this is that also, remember, how does Mark know that all of this happened?
He was there.
He wasn't there. Mark wasn't there. Who was?
Peter.
Peter was there. And so remember, you go all the way back to the beginning when we started Mark, the tradition is that Peter was asked all the time to share stories about your time with Jesus. And Mark was not one of the original disciples. Mark might have not even been alive for any of this, because he was a younger man. He comes in later in the book of Acts. But Peter would share these stories and Mark would write them down, which is why we call it the Gospel of Mark. So the only reason that we have this story about Peter is because Peter shared it. Which seems to me to say this is very important for us to apply to ourselves and to remember for ourselves. Peter's restoration is going to come later. But where we're going to end it here is with Peter's betrayal. And so this is kind of the question that I think we should be asking ourselves. And then we're actually going to watch something. We watched a little short movie earlier today that I thought really illustrated this well. And thinking about this question, a couple of questions. First of all, I guess, like, why are you following Jesus? Right? Are you following Jesus because, like Judas, there's some money to be made? Are you following Jesus, perhaps, like Peter, because you just really want to get in a fight? You want to change the world, and you want to overthrow things, and you want to knock down the bad guys or something like that, right? Or maybe you're following Jesus for some other reason. But the hard question is, if the reason we are following Jesus is not a reason that he has given to us, then eventually there's going to be a reason to betray him. And so we're going to watch this. It's a short film. It's a cartoon, actually. It's up for an Academy Award. But it's a Christian. It's a Christian short animation. And you're going to see there's a moment actually in it where a betrayal happens. And the betrayal happens for the most ridiculously small thing. But it has catastrophic consequences. So let me pull the screen down and then we'll get that going.